last land we meet tonight and the waters that surround us.
We thank you, Lord, for the honour of being called by our fellow citizens to this office of honour and trust. Give us grace diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us to the common good and as in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please have a seat. So again, welcome to this meeting on Remembrance Day 2019. Do we have any apologies? Any declarations of interest?
Yes,
Councillor McLaughlin.
Mr. Mayor, I have a non-pecuniary, non-significant interest in item 4.4, which is the 2 Prince Edward Parade matter, as the owner is a close friend and former neighbour.
Thank you very much.
But I don't feel I need to leave the chamber.
Thank you. Any others, councillors? We move to confirmation of the minutes. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Crassoy. Any discussion?
This is a question.
Councillor Collins.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the General Manager. I have a question without notice regarding the expenses. And it said that will that be available?
We'll get it out this week.
Next week?
Yes, fantastic.
And published in the next.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was actually a correction. I should have jumped in a bit earlier on that. My name's been put in twice as the attendant, so I think I only got one vote, so that needs to be corrected. The other matter I was going to raise is to do with questions without notice. With respect to the one that I asked in relation to the redevelopment of the Valentia Street Wharf facility, there's an answer there that relates to the discussion over heritage impacts, but it doesn't answer my questions in relation as to whether council will continue negotiation with the Department of Planning over this matter, and also whether it will advocate for the people of Woolwich as to whether, or as to, because I mean I think the strong feeling down in Woolwich is that there needs to be an alternate wharf for that period of time, and there is an appropriate wharf near Deckhouse. And in the discussion I had with the people that gave the exhibition on that Saturday morning, they seemed quite willing to, if it was feasible, to put a couple of piles in to make a ferry more moorable there. So I think we really need to do a little bit more in that area for our residents.
Okay, is that a question you're directing at the General Manager?
It is, Mr. Mayor.
Take it on notice and give you an answer this week, General Manager.
Yes.
Just
Thank
on
you.
that same note, Mr. Mayor, if I could
Councillor Craswell.
add, on that item 3 and 7.2 question without notice, I was wondering if this would be an opportunity also to advocate a little stronger on opportunities around a bus trial on and off the peninsula to collect numbers of travellers. It just could be an opportunity to
Reinforce it. All right, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Miles.
Mr. Mayor, page 5, motion 255-19. The motion really regarding the overpass and the improvements to the overpass as a potential of what's happening. We'll be considering that later on this meeting. That was deferred to this meeting and it is not included in this meeting. Now there's a motion that's been put up by Councillors Sanderson and Crassoy which deal with one very small component of that motion that was put last meeting. I'm just wondering why that was not brought back to this meeting, given 2 motions are going to be considered tonight that are different components of that same motion that I put last council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. It's because we were waiting on a report.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've made inquiries to the RMS. We're waiting for a response. I apologise for the delay, but we haven't received a response as yet.
Cover it? Does that cover it for you? Okay, thank you. Any further questions? I put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Now, it's been suggested to me we bring forward an item which is item 4.1, financial statements. We have Kathy Wu with us tonight from the Audit Office of New South Wales and presenting the Council's auditors. Would you like to present to us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening.
First of all, councillors, are you in agreement with that? All in favour? It's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity this evening to present my report on the audit of the Council of Municipality of Hunters Hill for the year ended 30 June 2019. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders both past and present. Before going into the specifics of my report, I would like to make some general observations on the audit process and our journey so far as auditors of the New South Wales local government sector. This year, the Audit Office of New South Wales conducted the audit of Hunters Hill Council in partnership with our audit service provider, Prosperity. In 2018, we went through an open competitive tendering process for the majority of the councils in the state to bring in new insights and experiences. We appreciate that local government is a unique sector. Whilst the Audit Office's oversight of the audits has led to greater consistency across council's financial reporting, we also acknowledge that each council has its own characteristics based on size, geographical location, and the services provided. These differences have influenced the financial profile and performance of Hunters Hill Council. Early next year, we will be tabling our third sector report to Parliament on local government. This report will consolidate the audit of 128 local councils, 10 county councils, and 13 joint organisations. We continue to identify insights around financial reporting, governance and internal controls, IT controls, asset management, and financial performance and sustainability. We also tabled 3 performance audit reports in 2019. They were on development assessments, domestic waste management, and workforce reform in amalgamated councils. The Audit Office's annual work program was released in August 2019, including the scheduled performance audits for 2020. We will consult with councils, such as yours and others, on the choice of future performance audit topics. Any suggestions will be considered and can be made to me or via our online website. Turning now to the financial audit of Hunters Hill Council. The results for 2019 were mostly consistent with the prior year, with a slight improvement across total revenue, net operating result, and net operating result before capital grants and contributions. I'm pleased to report that we issued an unqualified audit opinion for the Council's financial statements, which means the statements present a true and fair view of the Council's financial operations for the year and contain no material errors. My report notes that the Council achieved an operating surplus of just under $1 million. This was mainly due to a $1 million increase in government grants for the Baronia Park upgrade, and the growth in rates and annual charges revenue was generally consistent with the rate peg increase of 2.3%. There are 6 performance ratios included in my report, which are audited within the Council's general purpose financial statements in Note 23. Hunters Hill Council has met 5 of the 6 ratio benchmarks set by the Office of Local Government in 2019, which was a similar outcome as the previous year. The one ratio that was not met was the operating performance ratio, which measures how well the Council contained operating expenditure within operating revenue. This ratio this year was negative 4.24%, below the benchmark of 0%. The ratio decreased from last year due to the growth in capital grants and contributions, which are excluded from the ratio calculation. On the positive side, Council's own source operating revenue ratio of 85.22% is above the benchmark of 60%, reflecting a low level of reliance on external funding such as grants and contributions. The unrestricted current ratio of 8.08 times exceeded the benchmark of 1.5 times, which indicates a sound liquidity position to meet creditors and other liabilities. The debt service cover ratio was infinite or effectively not applicable as the council did not have any borrowings. Council's rates and annual charges outstanding percentage was 2.98% and met the benchmark of less than 5%. This shows that council is effective in collecting rates debtors within the due dates. The cash expense cover ratio of 18.85 months exceeded the benchmark of 3 months. This indicates that council had the capacity to cover over 18 months of cash expenditure without additional cash inflows at 30 June 2019. In addition to the ratios, we noted that council spent less on asset renewals in 2018-19 than last year. That is, the council spent 0.6 million compared to 0.8 million. This year, the renewals represented 26% of depreciation expense, which was 2.3 million. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the council staff, especially the finance team, for their cooperation and assistance during the audit. Once again, thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors, for inviting me to present our financial audit result for Hunters Hill Council. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Councillors, questions? Councillor Collins.
Yes. So with the performance ratios, Hunters Hill's biggest problem is in the unaudited Special Schedule 7, not the general purpose statement. So is anything within the ratios that you're auditing and ranking councils on, does any of that include the information in Special Schedule 7?
No, councillor, the Special Schedule 7 on infrastructure assets is not within the scope of our audit.
So with the for a council to be classed as meeting these requirements, I would have, and I'm sort of asking your opinion as an auditor. First of all, is Special Schedule 7 going to be subject to audit in the future? Is that the plan of the New South Wales Audit Office?
Councillor, at this stage, I cannot comment on whether it will be audited in the future. It is currently not required to be audited. At this stage, there has not been a framework set for auditing that report.
Will the Special Schedule 7 be information contained in that be subject to the report put to Parliament at all?
At this stage, I'm not aware if that would be included in the report to Parliament.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
So, councillors, it's receive and note. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Collins. Was that correct? Any discussion required? Councillor Williams, do you have a comment you'd like to make? Anybody wishing to speak for? Against? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come back to 3.1, councillors. A motion to install a rural wishing tree this Christmas. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Collins. Councillor Miles.
Mr. Mayor, this is something that obviously we're all quite conscious of, especially what's happening today across states of New South Wales and Queensland. This is something that other councils are doing around the state, and I think it's something that would be appropriate up to Christmas time to install at the chambers here and perhaps at the villages a local wishing tree for people that are able to give charitably to those that will be going without at Christmas time. So those drought-affected communities, particularly in rural New South Wales, that the kids that won't have presents this Christmas, or people that will be struggling to feed their families this Christmas, it would be appropriate, I think, that the council and the community at large reach out and lend a helping hand to those communities. For those that aren't going to make a material donation, I think it's probably good that the council encourage people to buy a bale through the Buy a Bale campaign, and equally that through the Wishing Tree, any donations collected, we find an appropriate charity to partner with. I know Red Cross do and Vinnie's both do a very good job at distributing care packages at Christmas time, and I think particularly given what's happening across New South Wales and Queensland and Victoria, that that's going to be a focus of a lot of the charities, is getting care packages out to people at Christmas time. So I hope you can support the motion.
Good initiative. Anybody wishing to speak against?
Not against, Mr Mayor.
Anybody wishing to speak against?
I wonder if Councillor Mars will consider an amendment.
Okay. You wish to make an amendment?
That's not really
Please
speaking
go
against.
ahead.
Yeah.
Councillor Miles, I wonder if you would consider at point 4 whether we said, you've written that council identifies an appropriate charity to partner with. I wonder whether you would consider that council leverage off our friendship pact with Richmond Valley Council to partner on this initiative.
I don't see any problem with it, but as long as we can, it's a distribution problem. Is my point, that if we do have a sort of a critical mass of prezzies and hampers and things to go out, we have to make sure that there's someone that can distribute those, and I would have thought a charity would be the logical choice, but I'm happy if the council is to write to our regional partner council and ask them their advice, perhaps. I don't know if they want to receive a whole bunch of presents and hampers and bits and pieces, but we can ask the question.
Council, we've been talking to the Mayor of Richmond Valley, and they're certainly affected by the fires. We spoke to them last year about the drought, and they were in pretty good condition in terms of the drought work. They had a few trucks that went out and delivered some, but inside their municipality they were doing quite well, but the fires have affected them. And we've been talking to Robert Musto about perhaps doing something for the children for Christmas up there. So that's one of the things we have, and we could extend that to consider your motion, which I compliment you on. I think it's a very good motion. So Councillor Crasso is asking, what are the words you'd like to see added, Councillor?
I think it's that council leverage off our friendship pact with Richmond Valley Council on this initiative, etc.
That could be number 5, potentially.
We could just do it as part of, don't need it in the motion anyway. It's just probably sit there, yeah.
So is there a second? Did you want to add that in as point 5?
I can add that in as point 5.
Councillor Crasso, are you happy with that added as
Thank
point
you.
5?
I think that would be great.
Okay, have we captured that, Ms. Dowse?
Are you happy with the amendment?
You happy with that?
With
Richmond Valley.
yeah.
And that becomes point 5. Richmond Valley Council.
Yes, sir. Yeah. On this initiative, etc. But I think.
So we'd have a discussion with them and see if they want to be part of that. Is that correct?
Okay. Well, the identify everything is in the explanation. It's not helpful.
You got it? Any further discussion needed, councillors?
That becomes 5 and 4 remains the same.
That's it. All right, any further discussion, councillors? We'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Miles. 3.2, motion regarding pedestrian safety of the overpass. Councillor Sanderson, seconded Councillor Cresswell. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't know that this motion needs a great deal of explanation. I think it's pretty well covered in the reasons that I've given in the papers. It's well known how dangerous that particular corner is. We've had 2 reports from, first of all, Stapleton and later then the Arup PAMP report that have identified and suggested solutions to rectify this problem. It's very clear that there's traffic travelling at those speeds around that particular entry point to Burns Bay Road present a real hazard to pedestrians. I cross there quite often myself, and you think of the numbers of kids that are delivered to the shopping centre and are picked up by buses in the shopping centre later in the day. I think it's very important that we pursue this initiative. I apologise, I did distribute these by email to all councillors, but there are a number of diagrams of the potential outcomes of the proposal. It was not my intention to be prescriptive of enough, but I mean, there are 3 possible outcomes that might come out of this. This was sent by email, and just to give councillors an idea of what may occur. Again, I didn't want the motion to be prescriptive. I think it's just a matter of, I think the 2 important things are that we sharpen up that turn going onto Burns Bay Road to slow vehicles down, and also to provide a signalised crossing. The other point there, as we've seen from recent decisions that come out of the, or recommendations that have come out of the local traffic committee, these days pedestrian or zebra crossing close to corners seem to be out of favour. So I think the signalised lights is probably the best outcome. That's all. That's the principal thing that the motion is advocating, and I commend the motion.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion?
Not against, but I've got questions.
Councillor Collins.
To the General Manager through you, Mr Mayor. This is obviously the next thing that we're already talking about this with a local member. Is this the method to do it, or should this go to local traffic committee in conjunction with Anthony Roberts' office?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I might ask the Director of Service Delivery to explain the process.
Through you, Mr Mayor, this is outside of Traffic Committee's delegation, being a state road and affecting signals. We have written to the RMS though, as council officers in the past, and asked them to include this in the future black spot funding. But obviously if we go through this channel with council support, would lend some weight.
Okay, great, fantastic.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Sorry, just a question, just to follow up on what Councillor Collins was asking, through you, Mr Mayor. They came back to us, didn't they, saying that it wasn't on their agenda for a couple of years or something like that. This will hopefully make the process faster or get the process moving.
Sorry,
Through you, Mr Mayor, we received a response on the 11th of July, was the latest one that I have seen, saying that they will nominate it for a future black spot funding program. However, if it's unsuccessful this financial year, it'll be nominated again for the following financial year. That's the last correspondence I received.
Any further, Councillor Collins?
Just one question. In part 2, should it be addressed bicycle access if feasible?
As feasible.
It's feasible. Address it access.
Well, you could do something. It's only a matter of degree.
Okay. I don't really understand that sentence, but yeah.
Could you explain
anyway.
that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, if feasible might mean that nothing is done. I think something potentially can be done. If you say as feasible, well, that means you can do what's possible.
Okay, right, thanks for the clarification. Is that a legal sort of view of the terminology? Or?
I don't know whether it'd be illegal, but I mean, that'd be my grammatic understanding of what the motion says.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Collins again.
Just on that, actually, it doesn't make sense. And to address bicycle access as feasible, how do you address it as feasible? It's either if feasible, or just leave it off. It doesn't make sense. But I'm not going to hold it up. But it's not correct grammar, and I just thought I'd. But anyway.
Okay.
But it makes no difference.
Thanks, Councillor Collins. Councillor Williams.
Just through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Sanderson. I was just wondering what the status of these diagrams are in terms of the motion, because I would see option 5 as being totally unrealistic. So are these things that we're going to be pursuing, or are they just for information?
Were they issued for clarity or?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just proposed there as possible solutions. I think in I said in the reasons that option 5 clearly wasn't feasible because of the turning or the sharpness of the turn into the easternmost of the entry points to Burns Bay Road. I mean, there were other permutations of this in Stapleton's report where they were talking about having a bus stop at that point. That I haven't gone into that. I mean, the conclusion of Arup was that it was better to leave the bus stop where it was. So I don't want to enter into that. I'm just leaving this as a very broad, non-prescriptive motion to say that we should pursue something. The two important things are to harden up that turn and to have signalised lights.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion?
Can I get clarification? This is not part of.
No.
This is totally separate.
Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Miles.
I'll speak for the motion, but again, given that it is not prescriptive, I am supporting it. The PAMP that was produced in 2014 probably needs a review at this point. There are options that are wholly unrealistic in the handout that we've been given. Travelling from Joubert Street northbound towards Burns Bay Road off-ramp is something that probably needs to, I do every day. So there's a clear traffic problem with removing the through traffic from Joubert Street to Burns Bay Road, because then you'd have to turn left, go all the way down to the Shell service station, turn around and do a loop-to-loop to get onto Burns Bay Road. So the PAMP probably needs to be looked at again to also update it as to potential bollards and things on the inside pedestrian access ways on the overpass, because that's a problem of going concern. Again, this motion forms a very small part of the motion that was put last meeting, which is to start to move on some of those issues that were included in the PAMP but never got acted on. Now, there are obviously constraints with state government agencies being involved, but there are obviously things that council can do, not just to push them along, but to get involved in the implementation of that PAMP. So I would just say that it's probably time to have a look at that document and to see what is realistic and what isn't realistic. As Councillor Williams pointed out, there are some options in there that obviously won't suit the situation that's there at the moment. So commend the motion, but we probably need to look at that document.
Thanks very much. Right reply, Councillor Sanderson, or are you happy with that?
Look, I'll just make a couple of further comments, if I could, Mr. Mayor. We've addressed the Reapy Road one last week, but I mean, in terms of risk assessment, I made some remarks at the end of this that, we're talking about a road where traffic can travel probably up to 80 kilometres an hour, as opposed to a local road where they can travel about 40. So the consequences of any incident there are far greater. The likelihood is also far greater because people turning at that corner are far less aware of the potential problem than others using local roads. So I think it's really important that we get this one going. I think we need to prompt RMS over it urgently, and that was the motivation behind this motion. I think the sooner we get onto it, the better. I understand Councillor Miles' concerns about exit from Joubert Street. I would hope that that could be maintained, and I hope that that will be dealt with at the time there is any discussion and communication, and I hope there would be. If I could add another point, that I've said in the report that Councillor Crasso and I attended a workshop at the recent Local Government New South Wales conference. At that workshop, we seem to be hearing from senior people at Transport for New South Wales that there will be a change in the way that they operate, and that a place will be considered as part of movement in general. So I hope that they are true to their word, and that this gives us a better opportunity, because at the end of the day, providing better pedestrian access between Huntersville Village and everything to the east of the overpass is incredibly important for the placemaking of that centre.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. We move on to 3.3, the motion to establish a rural aid and infrastructure funds. Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Collins. Councillor Miles.
Yes, Mayor. This is something that I've sort of been musing on a while. It's bigger than Huntersville Council, but I think that it certainly is something that we could start to advocate for. Its main purpose was, in my mind, originally infrastructure, given that most rural councils struggle to keep up with their infrastructure backlog. Some metropolitan councils struggle to keep up with their infrastructure backlog, but we have a lot of many councils, I'm sure. We have metropolitan councils sitting on very substantial cash reserves, City of Sydney being one, who are sitting on some $500 million, whilst rural councils across New South Wales particularly, but across all rural councils in the country, struggle to meet the demands of increased infrastructure requirements, and they have very large infrastructure spends because of the size of the municipalities, and they're not able to keep those assets up to grade because they don't have the rate space or the population to make sure that those assets are kept in the condition that you would expect them to be kept in if you were living in a metropolitan council. So that was the thought process behind the motion originally, but given the situation of the last 6 months and probably a little bit more, with the drought that's affected so many communities in New South Wales and Queensland in particular, and now with the bushfires that are raging all over the state, I think it's also appropriate that were a fund to be created, it could be dispersed in times of need or emergency, as we're seeing now. Obviously, those are two very difficult situations, and you know, there are a variety of things that we could do as a council to try and alleviate some of the hurt in those rural communities. But establishing a fund, and as I said in point 3, to establish a working party so that we know what the scope of that fund could be and how it would be dispersed in a meaningful way, is something that I think certainly I'd be passionate to advocate for, and passionate to advocate for in those agencies to the Minister, through Local Government New South Wales, the ROCs if need be, and through ALGA. So I think that we can kickstart this right to some of the metropolitan councils, get their views on it. They are sitting on substantial amounts of money whilst our rural cousins struggle to meet the demands met by their communities just in general, but more broadly in situations where there is genuine need in the bush for people to step up and give a little. I think that this could be a very good mechanism for us to do that.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I don't draw away from the importance of drought and fire that we're facing at the moment. But I do question the role of local government in doing what is basically a state government and a federal government's responsibility. And they have an overview to enable them to distribute and ensure that these funds for these purposes are put in the right place, the right quantity and the right time. I don't see it as a local government role in creating funds. There's been enough cost shifting over the years, funds being passed on to costs being passed on to councils to deliver what are basically state and federal responsibilities. We've seen the FAGS grants being decimated in terms of supporting local government infrastructure, and particularly felt very strongly in regional areas. At the federal conference I went to, it was the major topic on everybody's mind. The lack or the inability of governments of all persuasions to honour its commitment to provide financial assistance grants, which go a long way to servicing the issue which Councillor Miles is proposing here. It's a commendable approach, but I don't think it's a role for us as local government to be doing. It is again doing the job of what should be done by a state and federal government, not burdening local ratepayers.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anybody wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Collins.
Mr. Mayor, well, that's just nonsense. It's all of our responsibility. Everybody can do their bit. I'd lost to understand, with everything going on at the moment with drought and bushfires, how you would bring it back to cost shifting. This is a simple motion for local councils to rally together to help other councils, and your unhealthy obsession with the state government.
Councillor.
Withdrawn.
Thank you.
Your preoccupation with state government and cost shifting is an absolute disgrace in what is
Councillor.
withdrawn.
Councillor, can you speak for the motion?
Well, I think it's a good idea, Mr. Mayor. I think it's nice when councils can rally together and help each other and support each other, as good communities do, and as good community members do.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion?
I just have a couple of questions if I could.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to Councillor Miles. In point two, I just need to sort of work this out. You talk about an annual levy on metropolitan councils, and you pointed out that the City of Sydney has amounts of money, whereas we don't. Is there a percentage that you're thinking of?
No, that is why you would establish a working group to establish the terms of reference and the constitution and the minutiae of the fund, how those funds would be dispersed into rural communities, what reserves would potentially be set aside for the aid fund as compared
it's
to
not that, it's how much each council would be paying. So
I can't answer that because that has to be something that goes to a working party. So
you're saying that,
Councillor, it's not a debate over a question. You can put the question. Councillor can answer the question, but it's not a debate.
Is it opt in or opt out? Can you opt in or opt out? Is that what you're thinking about?
It could be, yeah. So
Okay.
I prefer it not be, but it could be.
Does that answer your question?
It's good.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right, anybody wishing to speak against? For? I'd like to speak for it. I'm very concerned about cost shifting, I must say, and I think there's been a lot of money that should be in our accounts is not our accounts. But I think this is a great initiative, and I think it's something we need to do. We need to support each other in tough times. We've got floods, fires and drought. Really important that we find a way to help those who are struggling with large amounts of infrastructure in their area. I noticed that some of that infrastructure has been taken back by state government in some of those country areas, and we've got a fair run at the local government conference recently, and that's a good start in helping them, and they're in difficult positions, large areas small income rates, and I think we need to help them. And in some ways, we're very much like them. We've got a small rate base and a lot of ageing infrastructure, so we have a similar problem to what some of these other places have. So I'm happy to support that motion, and thanks for ringing it. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thanks for that. Thank you. So 4.2, the Church Streets Overpass digital advertising. So this is a report from Mr. Kerry Smith. There's a recommendation there on page 89. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As was discussed at the previous meeting, or touched on at the previous meeting, the proposal to put a digital advertising sign of the dimensions or any dimensions right in the middle of our conservation area, I think goes against everything which this council and community would stand for. It will provide a foreign element that, to me, is just commercial revenue raising by the state government without any consideration of its impacts on what is one of the most significant heritage communities within the state. I think it will diminish and also create diminish the values that we hold, and also create issues of safety in relation to it. And the points raised within the recommendation I support as being relevant and also very important aspects in the way that we should be addressing this issue. Where does this sort of thing stop? The state government clearly wants to make revenue out of something that, to me, shouldn't ever be applied in Hunters Hill.
Yeah, Councillor. Those wishing to speak against? For? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, firstly, through you, I'd like to thank staff for this excellent report. I think it contains about 12 points. I, out of concern for the proposal last week to, in a roundabout fashion, support the advertising signage on the overpass, had drafted something myself. I think I had 10 points. A lot of them are very much in common with those that our senior planner, Mr. Smith, has produced. I think the only extra ones I had were related to the fact that the position of these signs would impinge views off the overpass, and I think that's an important heritage impact, because we do talk about view corridors in our planning instruments and controls. So therefore I would absolutely commend this motion. The points that it makes are absolutely first class, and I think I'll be very sad if this goes ahead, despite the well-reasoned argument that has been put in this recommendation.
Very wishing to speak against the recommendation?
Mr. Mayor, the motion that went to council 2 weeks ago was not in favour of this LED sign going up. That was an incorrect statement.
Okay, thank you for clarification. Is that your understanding?
Well, I don't think I said that.
All right, so it wasn't your intention?
No.
All right. All right, thank you. Councillor Collins?
No, 4.
You want to speak against
No,
that?
4.
4, okay. Councillor Collins.
Yeah, look, I obviously, I don't want the signs there at all, but I think it was irresponsible last week, the other week, to deny the motion. Because this is a state road, state government are assessing this, it's $1 million of revenue to them probably every year. For us to deny a motion put 2 weeks ago just to investigate whether or not we can cash in on something that's going to happen anyway, is just irresponsible oversight. It's just poor management. It's more likely than not that this is going to happen, and we're now putting in an objection without knowing if there is any appetite for them to share the revenue. So that is a poor outcome of this council, and it was for petty political reasons. And I think it's not a good outcome for the community. So I support the motion because I don't want it built there, but they do. I think I would like council to get a cut of it.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against the recommendation which is there? Or Councillor Miles?
The recommendation. Again, I don't think anyone here wants LED signage on the overpass. From my reading, the application is fairly consistent with SEP 64, a SEP that I am broadly familiar with. We're not going to derive any benefit out of this though, and that's a shame. We have obviously work to do on the PAMP, which has been brought into this meeting. We have the opportunity to upgrade the overpass in a way that would beautify one of the main entrances into Hunters Hill, but we're not going to see any benefit out of this application as a result of a deferral that is now not going to be brought to council because it's not in the business papers here and we're making a decision on this tonight. So it doesn't need to be brought back to council now. We're losing a significant community facility in the capacity for local organisations to advertise on banners on the overpass. We probably are not going to be able to negotiate with the state government and APN Outdoor or JC2Co the ability for local advertising. I very much doubt that we will, but we're not going to see any benefit out of this now, and that's a shame.
Anybody wishing to speak against? Yes?
About the community displaying of banners on the overpass, that's actually technically already illegal and not allowed by the RMS. Community groups do it. Sometimes their banners get taken down, sometimes they get left up. But
No,
if you look at the...
Sorry, it's wrong. It's not right. Not right.
Councillor Crossley?
It's incorrect, yeah.
They're allowed to put them there under
Councillor
the
Crossley?
RMS rules?
Yes.
There we go.
Councillor Crossley?
My apologies, Mr Mayor. In my 8 years on the Food and Wine Festival Committee and my dealings with the RMS at the overpass, they were the rules we had back then, so they've obviously changed. My apologies.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay.
Anybody wishing any further discussion needed?
Just a point of clarification on some of the issues that were raised by Councillor Miles and Councillor Crowley, just in relation to the lack of benefit. We do actually have in our conclusion that currently community groups rely on banner exposure on the Church Street overpass. If this proposal proceeds, then these opportunities should remain through new display structures. So we have put in there submissions that we would like some benefit to be maintained for that if that happens. Perhaps we could amend it if you want to get in some of the other benefits that you have had in your
I think it's a recommendation, staff recommendation.
But it is in there.
Thrown out last week.
Ship has sailed.
Councillors, coming to put the motion. I am also disappointed that we didn't pass the motion last week, and I voted for the motion because I think the councillors who put the motion and second the motion are probably right. There's an opportunity here, and if I put my mercenary hat on, it would be nice to have some money in our pocket for something that's probably going to happen anyway. But I must say I support this recommendation entirely as it is. I think we should stand behind this and fight together on this. But I think unfortunately it's going to happen and we won't get any revenue. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Right of reply.
Right reply? Right reply?
Is it too late?
No, absolutely not. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr Mayor, there's nothing to preclude negotiations by staff if the government decides to go ahead with this and seek some benefit for our community if the government's going to be pig-headed and go ahead. I don't see it as being exclusive, mutually exclusive. I see this is a process of stating where this community's view is on the issue, and if they want to go ahead and do it, then we can make other approaches to them. But there's no sense in not making a very strong point on what we would expect them to be doing, and that's to respect the integrity of our community's desire to have that conservation area protected and not subjected to what is really crass commercial advertising of a grand scale. It's not a diminutive thing, it's a major 12.5 metres by 3.5 metres on both sides. It's just enormous. And I think we have to fight the issue. I don't concede that it's laid out as there, but if in the event the government does go ahead with it, then council can take approaches appropriately to seek negotiations on the income from it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried, and can I point out it's unanimous too. Thank you very much. Good decision. Councillors, we're up to 4.3, draft section 7.1, local infrastructure contribution plans 2020. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor Miles?
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor. This is obviously something that is going to enormously benefit Hunters Hill Council and will address some of the backlog of infrastructure that we're going to have to deal with in the years to come. I would have liked to have seen potentially the contributions more localised, so that contributions made in Gladesville, for example, stay in Gladesville. That being the case, we can probably do that through our centres strategy, which I know that the staff are looking at, but it would be good to see money that is raised in those areas, spent in those areas a bit more consistently, because there is a feeling, particularly on one end of the municipality, that funds raised there get spent mainly on the peninsula. So I think that as we go through our placemaking in Gladesville, and as developments come online there and the area starts to transform, I think it's important that we spend contributions that are made in those centres in and around there for public benefit, rather than shifting them to potentially projects that can be funded in other ways. I would have liked to have seen that. This is a good start, and I know that it will be reviewed as a live document, but certainly that's something that is front of mind.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody, the recommendations there on page 106, anybody wishing to speak against that? Anybody for? Can I put the motion, councillors? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. Thank you. 4.4 is dedication of a roadway to Prince Edward Parade, Hunters Hill. Move Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Crassel. Councillor Miles. Any discussion? Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Can I put the motion, councillors? I put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried, and again, that's unanimous. Uh, 4.5, the minutes of the Ordnance Risk Improvement Committee held on the 9th of October. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor Collins?
No discussion.
Anybody wishing to speak on this? I make the point that we've been told recently that in future no councillors will sit on this at all. Neither the mayor or any other councillors will sit on it. That's part of the... Might take us a while to get there. I think we've got a certain amount of time to comply with that. But I think, as Councillor Collins pointed out to me recently, that can be good practice not to have councillors or the mayor sitting on these committees. So that's where it's headed. It'll rob us a bit of opportunity, I think, in some ways, but it'll keep us above suspicion, if I may put it that way. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have dealt with it, though.
Yeah, I know. Just briefly, the other point that did come out of the NESROC meeting that we attended the other night is that there will be a degree of cost shifted onto
All right.
local government
All right,
through.
thanks very much.
through
Let's,
that.
let's not go into that now. I think we've dealt with that too. So the next item is 4.6. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Crassor. Councillor Collins.
No discussion.
All right, anybody wishing to speak about this? Can I put,
about
complain about it? Can I put the motion? Those in favour? Against? That's carried. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. That's the last item.
Yep.
And the next thing we have is general business.
General business, yes.
General business. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to briefly speak about an article, Mayor's column in the Weekly Times 2 weeks ago, just to clarify some things that I think probably might not portray things as they might be portrayed. If I could just briefly read this about the. In addition, Council achieved a net operating surplus of $986,000, including capital income, grants and contributions, and a deficit of $495,000 when these items are excluded. However, had a $1 million payment due from the new bus shelter contract been received as budgeted and expected, a positive operating result would have been achieved. This $1 million revenue will now be carried into the 2019-20 financial year and added to our other initiatives, contributing to a positive operating result, including capital income in 2019-20. My concern with this is that the $1 million is a once in, am I allowed to say how many years?
One-off.
Yeah, one-off, yes. And how long is the extent of the contract?
We can estimate 17 years.
So we've got a one-off payment that happens every 17 years. And to suggest that the only reason we had an operating deficit was because this payment fell in the wrong income year, I don't think paints an accurate picture that we have a deficit, and this one-off payment should not really be considered as something that a little blip. So I don't think that's really portraying this true state of affairs. One other point I'll make is that further, we have a plan to work through the estimated 8% asset improvement backlog that was recently assessed by our asset engineer. Across New South Wales, this backlog ranges from 0 to 24%. Now, that 8% is taken from to bring things up to a satisfactory standard, but not all assets. So, to bring everything out of the poor or very poor state is actually bring everything up to a standard set by council, and that figure, instead of being $8 million, is $27 million. Now, as for that being in the range of the 0 to 24% of councils, in terms of metro councils, if I can just briefly bring the report that we're looking at. Don't have it right here. Assets, excuse me. Assets, okay. So our asset management ratio infrastructure backlog ratio was 1.7. And the group average was 2.2, and I can't find the figure I was looking at. But basically, the 0 to 24% is not to bring things up to a satisfactory standard in terms of not having poor or very poor assets. So I don't think it's an accurate measure of where this council is at. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I do not want to see in the papers or local papers any sort of indication that everything is okay here. We all realise that there are major challenges that we have, and the community are entitled to know the truth about this. We do have to spend $28 million, give or take, to bring things up to a satisfactory standard. It's not 8. It may be refined when we have our finish our asset sort of review, but to suggest that it's been a good result is not an accurate portrayal.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think this is an opportunity for debate. I think this is really a general business. You've raised it as a general business. I point out to you that the figure that was in the newspaper came directly out of the report that we put up 2 meetings ago. It's actually in tonight's report on page 88. And what it says is the infrastructure backlog ratio, estimated cost to bring assets to a satisfactory standard. The cost of that is 7.9 million, and that represents 8.23%. If you turn to the page to see what that covers, we're dealing with page 87 and 88. So if you look at what that covers, that $7.9 million is buildings, roads, stormwater drainage, footpaths, curb and guttering. One of the issues we have, of course, in the municipality, and it was pointed to by one of our engineers earlier in the year, in February when we looked at it, is that some of the things that we value most about our municipality are damaging some of our assets. So the trees which damage curb and guttering and footpaths are some of our most valued assets. And I think that we need to have a look at that in the future and try to decide what we really want from those footpaths. I don't think we're ever going to move all of those footpaths up to level 1, and I don't think we ever want to move them to level 1. But if we can move the 5s and 4s up to 3, I think we'll do okay. But that's not for me to say. I think that's an issue for a discussion with residents so we understand what their aspirations are for some of these things. $1 million, had we received the $1 million in the last financial year, it would have pushed our result. I didn't imply that we would get a $1 million every year, Councillor Collins. I said it was a $1 million which we'll get next year. So we'll get a $1 million next year, and that'll improve our operating result next year. But of course, you may want to pull that out as a single item, one-off item, but I didn't suggest that would come every year for 17 years. So without wanting to get into a big debate about it, I think this figure that I quoted is correct, and I'm happy to defer to the General Manager for her opinion on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I might ask the Director of Corporate Services to provide a comment.
Yeah, just in terms of those numbers, there's a couple of indicators shown on page 88 and the tables on page 87. We have the infrastructure asset backlog figure that's quoted is 7.9 million, and that's 8.2% of our carrying cost of the assets. And that's based on engineering estimates, and I underline that word estimates because at the moment we're going through the process of doing a condition assessment of all our assets. So the figure's been arrived at by those estimates and by applying a formula that says if we wanted to bring all the 4s and 5 condition roads, that's the poor and very poor roads, up to a satisfactory standard, that's how much it would cost. A higher number, the 27 million, is based on bringing the full cost of bringing all those items, all those 4 and 5 rated roads and other assets up to a condition 1. In other words, if you replace them, they immediately become condition 1. But again, they're based on estimates. So we're currently going through a process of having all this condition data done. At the end of that, we'll be engaging the company to give us some investment options. And as I alluded to in the report previously, there is the potential to upfront fund an investment in our asset renewal, and we'll get some options to come back for that. But loan financing is one of those options that we could take advantage of. And the other thing that's important too is to have a conversation with our community around the service standard they want to see for these assets. You know, and that might vary depending on the nature of the actual asset itself, along the lines of what the Mayor mentioned, but also about, you know, the case of roads, the amount of use and those sorts of things. So we're looking at a February-March time frame of having some much better condition data than what these figures are based on, and also having those investment options before us.
But just a question on that, through you, Mr. Mayor. So to bring, so how much of the poor rated 4 would be brought up to satisfactory at the 7.9 million? What percentage?
What's taken there is 25% of the fours.
25% of the poor.
And 50% of the fives.
Okay, cool. So 25 and 50.
Any further questions? Councillor
I'd
Williams?
like to make a comment.
Councillor Williams.
I don't think it's a debate.
Well,
Just remember, it's not a debate.
it's not a debate, but I think Councillor Collins has put some issues on the table that I personally believe need to be addressed.
And do you think I've addressed them so far?
You've addressed some of them, but I think this issue that portrays this council as being in dire straits or whatever is far from the truth. We've heard from our staff in relation to, sure, it's a $1 million one-off event, but we've heard from our staff in briefings that they have a plan to move forward, and in the near future and into the future will be in the positive side of things. I don't know if you were there, Councillor Collins, but I heard very positive direction which our staff are taking us in, and a very satisfactory outcome for our residents. So I reject this perception that everything is doom and gloom. It's not. And from what I've heard from the staff, I have confidence that we can move forward in a positive way for our residents. We're playing with figures here, and I think we've heard by the accounting specialist of staff that we're going through a process. And I keep saying time and time again that you can't base decisions on these figures, which are estimates. You have to get the facts, and we have to be making decisions on evidence-based information. We're not at that stage yet. And I'd be surprised at the end of the day, once we've analysed our assets and looked at the real position of those assets, given the fact that I walk the municipality every day with my dog, I don't see major trip points or degradation everywhere. There are spots which I think council should be able to deal with as it moves forward. And I think it's very important that the level of service we provide needs to be reflective of what our community expects and wants, not some arbitrary figure that some big council might. Our community has special and unique qualities, and we need to reflect those in our decision-making processes around assets. So I think it's very important that we go through the step of getting facts to have evidence-based decisions so that we know exactly what the issues are, where they are, and be able to work through resolving those issues in consultation with the community. And then at the end of the day, if there's a funding shortfall, look at appropriate ways of funding that. We're a long way off that situation at the moment, and I reject that comment or those comments that put us in dire straits. We're going through a process. We've heard from our staff that that process is reasonable and will give us some accurate information to base our decisions on. And we are moving towards a good position into the future in terms of our budgetary processes. So I think that story needs to be told, and I think your report in the paper, as you say, was accurate and fair.
Thank you. Well, hold on. No, hold on. You've had a say. You've had a say.
I have a question.
You have a say. Councillor Grassler has some comments she wants to make.
I would just like to say thank you, Councillor Williams, and thank you, Mr Mayor, for clearing that up and for writing that informative piece in the paper. As we said a few weeks ago, we don't have the final figures in front of us, as Councillor Williams has said. But the point I would like to make is that I was asked just now to not go to the press and make our community believe that our council are doing a good job and that they're getting us on track. And so I would just like to say on the live stream with some social media here that I believe our council general manager and senior staff have done an excellent job, and we are on track. And when we get the full reports back to us in, I think it was going to be February, we will be March, we will be better informed to continue to govern this council well. I will not be silenced from telling my community that. Likewise, I don't think some councillors should be running around like Chicken Little saying the sky's falling based on estimates that they've blown out of proportion.
Councillor, we're dealing.
Thank
She
you.
called it Chicken Little.
We're dealing with this.
That's immature.
We're
The sky is falling.
We're dealing with the issue that Councillor Collins raised, not what Councillor Collins wrote in the press.
No,
May I
no, you
ask a
just told
question?
us we're not allowed to go to the press, so I'm just saying.
I didn't say
Mr.
that.
Mayor.
Can I have
No,
a
no.
question?
Question. Yes,
Just
certainly.
through you of
Yes.
Councillor Williams. As I don't think I was at that briefing, could you just enlighten me with some of these revenue measures that are going to plug the hole and maybe give me a debrief on that? Because I don't think I was at that.
No,
You
you
don't.
should go to the
Wait
briefings.
till March.
And
Oh,
if
you
you
can't-
want to
you
find
can't-
out what the general manager is.
Councillor, we'd be happy to.
Do you not know?
Councillor,
If you attend the meeting.
Councillor
you
Williams,
know.
could you stop, please? So, Councillor Collins, we have a list of revenue measures. I'm happy to go
I
through
was
it.
there. Thank you,
We'll go
Mr.
through
Mayor.
the next
I just
briefing.
don't think he knows them.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of order.
Yeah.
Withdraw.
All right, I'm going to wind this discussion on a general business matter up. I'm very pleased that these matters are on the table. I think it's the first time I've seen them on the table in this way. Yes, we have some work to do. I'm very confident that some of the strategies we've got in place will deal with them over the next few years, which is the last point you raised, Councillor. I'm very pleased. I'm always pleased when we understand something well, so we can then make a plan to resolve them. I don't like not understanding things, and I think we've all got a better understanding, and I'm really pleased about that. That's the bit I'm actually pleased about. So, councillors, if there's nothing further, I'm going to close the meeting. Any further discussion, general business? Meeting closed. Any questions without notice? Closed at 8:45 p.m. Thank you very much.